We're all set.
Thank you. Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books. I'm gonna make my... Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books, and we're thrilled to be hosting this event tonight, celebrating the release of Martha Ann Toll's new book, Three Muses. We're also very happy to welcome Devi Laskar, who will be talking with Martha tonight. I'll be providing both of the introductions, and then we'll have Martha and Devi in conversation. And there will probably, hopefully, be some time at the end. If there's any audience questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be glad to take those as time permits. Devi Laskar is the author of The Atlas of Reds and Blues, winner of the 7th Annual Crooks Corner Book Prize in 2020 for Best Debut Novel Set in the South. Also, this was the winner of the 2020 Asian Pacific American Award for Literature and a finalist for the North California Book Awards. Her second novel, Circa, was published on May 3rd, 2022 by Mariner Books, and her third novel, Midnight at the War, will be published by Mariner in early 2024. She holds degrees from Columbia University, the University of Illinois, and UNC Chapel Hill. A native of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, she now lives in California with her family. Martha Ann Toll writes fiction, essays, book reviews, and reads anything that's not nailed down. Her debut novel, Three Muses, won the Petrichor Prize for finely crafted fiction. Toll brings a long career in social justice to her work covering BIPOC and women writers. She is a book reviewer and author interviewer at NPR Books, The Washington Post, Point Magazine, The Millions, and elsewhere. She also publishes short fiction and essays in a wide variety of outlets. Toll has recently joined the board of directors of the Penn Faulkner Foundation. We'll switch over to them.
Hi, thank you so much, Becky. Thank you so much for having us. And I am so delighted to be here and to be in conversation about Three Muses, a book that I simply adored. So, hi, Martha.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. Huge thanks to you, and thank you to Anar and Becky for making it happen, Malvern Books.
Yeah, so well, I'm just going to jump in and get started. I have so many questions to ask you, but I think for those few people who have not read the book yet, could you just please tell them a little bit about the frame story of the book, and then maybe I can convince you to read.
Thank you. So Three Muses is framed around three Greek muses. The muses are song, discipline, and memory, and those ideas frame the novel. The story is nominally a love story between John Curtin, who was born Yanko Stein, and is a victim of the Holocaust. His family is murdered in the Holocaust, and he changes his name to John Curtin when he's able to get to the United States and becomes a psychiatrist. He survives the camp because his mother has him pulled out of line because he can sing. And so he survives by singing for the commandant of the camp, who's essentially the murderer of his family. As an adult, the book opens. He is in Paris at a medical conference, and he goes to the ballet, and he falls in love with Katya Symanova, who is a girl from Queens named Catherine Silman, lost her mother at a very young age, and has been renamed by the choreographer who she is enmeshed with in a very complicated, abusive co-creation relationship. His name is Boris Yanikov. And this love story is really strained because John doesn't really want to be around music, and Katya can't do her work without music.
That's great. and you know, I want you to read, but I just want you to quickly answer what was like the original spark that made you think, I'm going to write this story?
So I would say there were two sparks. One was that as a little girl, I studied ballet and I totally fell in love with it, but I did not have a shred of talent. So I didn't continue after a certain age because I was studying at a professional school that would not permit me to be advanced. So that felt like an epic failure at the age of 12. But one of the things to come out of it was this permanent love for ballet. But I did have the opportunity to watch the professional dancers rehearse, and it made a permanent impression on me. It was wonderful. I grew up in a very secular Jewish family, and I think that my first introduction to Judaism really was the Holocaust. We had relatives who were murdered at Auschwitz. I'm from a generation where the parents of my friends, some of them were Auschwitz survivors. We had other extended family
Mhm.
were Auschwitz survivors. So it was something that was hugely important to me. And from very, very early in childhood, I made an effort to educate myself about it. And as I got older, to speak with survivors. So I would say those two strains brought the book together. And then it's not sexy, but I was Googling around to think about how to frame such a story. And I stumbled into the Three Muses, and I was struck by lightning. Other people might not have been so excited about those Three Muses, but I thought that's what this book is about: song, discipline, and memory. So,
That's wonderful. That is really wonderful. That is so great. And can you quickly tell me, from point of spark to publication, how long it took?
yeah, I started working on the book in 2010, and it was published in September of 2022. So it was a long haul.
Yeah, yeah, and you persisted, so that's wonderful, and we're all the richer for it. Would you mind reading a couple of short passages for us?
Of course. And Debbie and I were talking yesterday in preparation for this call, and we both lined up around the concept of persistence in writers. It's really a necessity. Debbie was particularly asked if I could read something from the two characters' childhoods. So these are two very, very short passages. The first thing I'm going to read is when now John Curtin, arrives in America. He's taken in and adopted by a husband and wife named Barney and Selma, who lost their only son in the Battle of Sicily. And so they want to give to their new adopted son the gift that they would have given to their son Buddy. So John arrives in 1948. He's about 15 years old, and he is just going to bed the first night that he arrives in New York. A whole bed to himself, a room even, unlimited quantities of food. John lay down without taking off his clothes, as he had done ever since boarding a truck with Muti and Max a lifetime ago. Maybe he had never lain in a bed before, certainly not between such clean sheets or under such soft blankets. No longer ocean-born, he was still floating, drifting atop Papa and Muti and Max, buoyed by the dreams of a boy who had lived in this room and died in war. You could have everything that you needed, like Barney and Selma, and still lose everything. He closed his eyes. Maybe he had never slept before, or maybe he had, but along with his family, the memory had gone up in smoke.
Hmm,
And then the
that's so
next,
beautiful.
thank you. The next piece that I'm going to read is Katya as a child. She is still Catherine, and she's on a little date with her girlfriend Maya, who's a ballet friend. And Maya's parents are taking them out for ice cream. And this is very silly. I'm not finding my place here. Oh, here it is. And so Maya's parents are there. Katya at this point is a child with only a father. Her mother was killed in a car accident. And her friend's mother, Mrs. Bichette, is basically just making small talk. They're out for ice cream sundaes. Do you have plans for Thanksgiving, Catherine? Mrs. Bichette asked. Thanksgiving was for people whose mother made turkeys. Catherine was tired of cutting turkeys and Pilgrim out of construction paper at school. She was too old for it this year, but they would still have the feast at lunch when mothers came with trays of turkey and stuffing and cranberry sauce and sweet potatoes, and then stood behind their children at the long tables in the cafeteria. Mama was the only one who wasn't there. Mrs. O'Connell, or Mrs. Cresswell patted Catherine's head, making pity faces, as if she were a kindergartner. We go to my aunt's, Catherine said to Mrs. Bichette, which wasn't exactly true. But she couldn't figure out what else to say. She and Daddy and Aunt Mary went to Howard Johnson's, where there wasn't a whole turkey, but just a slice on each plate slathered in gravy. Catherine felt a little miserable thinking about it, even though she liked Howard Johnson's. It was just that no one did that on Thanksgiving.
That's great. That's great. And it's such a window, right? It's such a window between what you want to say and what you end up saying, right? And I just really loved so much about this book, and like the difference between, one of the things that I really wanted you to talk about is how you renamed them. Each of your main protagonists were renamed, and I wanted your insight as to why that was so important to you.
Well, I think names are really important. And sometimes if we go back to even biblical times in Genesis, God gives Adam and Eve the power to name things. So it's an ancient, really, really important concept. John Curtin's name in the old country in Germany was Janko Stein. And he is so traumatized by his experience that he wants to put everything behind him. And on the ship to America, he thinks, wow, I should name myself Curtin because I could pull a drape across my past. And he doesn't even spell it correctly because he's given wrong information about how to spell it. And then he thinks, well, I'm pretty sure everybody in America is named John, so I'll just fit right in if my name is John Curtin. Katya has it so the name has a lot of symbolism for him. Katya has a different situation where her name is Catherine Silman, and her choreographer, who is the person who both abuses her but also makes her career, says to her when she is 17 and about to enter the company, you can't use that name on stage. You have to have a Russian name. So he gives her the Russian name of Katya Symanova, which pushes her a little bit into an imposter syndrome because it's a bigger name than she is. She has to grow into it and achieve it. So it puts a lot of pressure on her. And I'm going to be a little spontaneous here because we weren't quite going to do this right now, but I really want everybody to get to know Devi. And Devi is a poet and an absolutely beautiful, beautiful novelist. And if I am remembering correctly, in the Atlas of Reds and Blues, I'm not sure your character has a name. Is that correct?
That is correct. So everyone else is named, but not the protagonist and her family.
So when we were chatting, we actually hadn't met before yesterday. We were chatting on the phone, and Devi is a woman after my own heart. She said she characterizes her writing as she writes about misogyny, racism, and being invisible in America. I'm like, right on. So I would love it if you talked us just a minute about Atlas of Reds and Blues, which is a truly amazing book. And then her new book that is out pretty recently called Circa, which I also loved.
Oh, thank you. Sure. Yeah. So in Atlas, without going into an enormous backstory, I had been working on this story since 2004, and my model was The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, because she's a poet, right, who wrote a novel, and it's a short novel. And so if you take all the beautiful pieces and put them together, it's a novel. But she is heavily anthologized, right, from House on Mango Street in poetry anthologies. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to do that. And so I took it to a workshop. It got really, in California, it got really well received. I made it really, really big. It was crowded with lots of voices. And then I lost it all in 2010 when the government in Georgia raided my house. And so among the things that they took was my computer. So as you can imagine, I was without the bulk of my work. And so the first year after the raid, I was busy corralling my family. I wasn't writing very much. And then when a year had gone by and I was like, I'm a poet, I should write a poem, right? And so I tried to write one and I couldn't, I couldn't do it. And so a good friend of mine in Atlanta had mentioned, known that I was a photographer as well. And she's like, okay, this is what you're going to do, because you're going to watch Julie and Julia, right? Because it's the true life story of Julie Powell doing the recipes out of Julia Child's cookbook. And then you're going to apply that by taking a new photo every day and slapping a caption or a title on it. And she goes, if you do that every day and you make that your practice, I bet your words will come back. And so I did. I started on June 23rd, 2011. I do it to this day. And so within a year, my poetry came back. And then within a couple of years after that, my prose came back. And so Atlas was the first thing I tackled when my prose came back. And it took me a couple of years. But this time around, I was like, I'm not writing a family story. I can't believe that I actually am able to write, but this time I'm going to tackle this family as it intersects with its circumstances, right? And so the reason why the mom is in the family is not named, that's a very circuitous answer, is that in the world of the story, there was no one who would bother to remember their names, right? Or bother to learn them. And so there was no way I was going to name them. And also I'm from a big Bengali family, and we always have titles for our elders and our siblings. And so I really wanted to honor that, and so that's why they're called, oldest sister and middle sister. And so it was a little bit of both. But thank you for the question.
I mean, it's so powerful, the no naming, and the there's a lot of police brutality in this country, and most of it goes unnamed and unnoticed. So that's this book really brings that home in incredibly powerful ways.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And we would love it if you'd read a little bit from Circa and just tell us a little bit about it.
Oh, sure. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Circa is my second book. It came out earlier this year. I'll just hold it up for a second. And it is about a Indian American family in North Carolina. And it's in the 80s. And it talks about it is also a love story primarily, but I think the actual love story is in this group of three is that the one of the three dies pretty violently early on, and then it sort of talks about how the two that remain carry on, and remember her. And so I just wanted to say that this is one of the books that I started this book in graduate school in 1994, and then I set it aside, and then I came back to it a couple of years ago, and the inspiration because this is actually second person. I did this book in second person is my classmate's book, Julie Otsuka. She wrote The Buddha in the Attic, which is about the Japanese picture brides in the years before World War II. And she did first person plural. And I thought that was like the coolest thing since sliced bread, And so I tried so hard to make this first person plural, and I couldn't. But when I stumbled on second person, it just sort of like, I could just hear her, right? And so I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to read the opening paragraph. It's called Blue Jean Dreams. You live in your star-spangled desires like a dream. You want to wear blue jeans the color of the moonlit sky at midnight, to pirouette in red suede shoes, warm in a white sweater you once saw on a mannequin at the expensive mall, your wavy hair out of its fish scale braids, down past your waist again, kept in place by a silver-tinted barrette, the shape of a butterfly. You want to appear to be a quintessential American girl, just like Katrina, the only freshman voted on the homecoming court 2 years ago, except the perfect sun-kissed complexion. In your daydream, your parents' refrain is never, "No, Hira, no," when you ask for a high school yearbook or a transistor radio. In your dream, you and your parents do not shout at each other over whether the printed batik salwar kameez, the color of parrot feathers, is suitable school attire. You do not fling across the room the handmade leather sandals that are better matched for the arid climate of Kolkata, not high school in the verdant suburbs of Raleigh, galleries of pine trees at every turn. In the dream, you wear mascara, talk for hours on a telephone in your room to your best friend Marie, and kiss Marie's older brother Marco on Saturday nights when he picks you up for a date in his father's vintage Chevy. In the dream, you are American, not Hirosanya, with a multitude of prefixes and hyphens and expectations in the shape and weight of a shifting subcontinent thousands of miles away. That's me.
That's so much.
Oh, thank you.
It's beautiful. And you can hear that you're a poet. And then I know that's a bit of a connection between our two books, The Outsider in America.
Yeah, it really is. I really wanted to ask you about Katya Symanova. And I just wanted to congratulate you for not giving the Hollywood ending. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, but I want you to talk about your strong feminist, ambitious ballerina.
Thank you. And interestingly enough, I have been doing some book groups in the last few weeks. And in one of them, the question came up, is this a feminist book? Which I'm not sure that I would ever ask that about any book. I don't think we write fiction like sociologists, basically. I don't think we do that. But a really long conversation ensued. My feeling is that Katya is a feminist because she is ambitious and she has a career goal and she is tireless in pursuing it. And I ran into some issues with my original agent. I ended up selling this book without an agent, but the agent for this book and other readers kept saying that she wasn't likable enough, and it kind of ticked me off because I felt that they were saying she was too ambitious. I thought it was code language for her being too ambitious. And I think she is a true artist and is a ballet art, a dance artist, and a creation artist. And there's nothing that she wanted to do that would deter her from that path. She definitely meets a lot of challenges, but in the end, I think she really, really has to pursue her career. And she was coming of age in a time when there were virtually no female choreographers. It's still a huge problem today, but it's less so. So for her to be creating dances along with Boris Yannikov was incredibly inspiring for her, but he declined to give her any credit. So that was another huge frustration that she had, but she was germane to all of his creation.
Yeah. And what I really loved about that was that, she sort of held her own, and she did have to make some sacrifices, but she also got some success, right? And it was not, it wasn't nameless sacrifice. And I really appreciated that. And I'm also wondering about your backstories, because you did such a great job, I thought, of weaving in pretty big and fraught with trauma and tension backstories to a really, what I would consider a very cinematic and propulsive front story. And I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about process. I'm going to geek out and do process questions now about how you made your decisions about when to do what.
So one answer to the process question is I had perhaps 100 more pages of backstory than made it into the book.
Wow.
And I have not spent time in a classroom by and large as a writer, but I was lucky enough in 2012 to go to Tin House, where I spent a week in Paul Harding's classroom, and I really love his writing. And he has many mantras, but one of his mantras is backstory as needed, that your reader is an intelligent reader, and 50% of the equation is the reader, and they will fill in a good way on backstory. So if you load them down with backstory, they'll get bored and it will slow the story down. So Katya, I had a lot written about Katya, whose mother is killed in a car crash at when she's 7. A lot more about her mother and their relationship and what that looked like. And then I realized it would be better, just as we meet people in public, we don't get a chronological history of their lives if we learned her life a little bit in pieces and could fill it in later. And similarly, the same with John, that and his story is so difficult that he can't even share it with his high school classmates or his med school classmates. It's too difficult to share.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the backstory, I felt like it should be spliced in, but not overly explained, because neither character is really going to do that when they sit down with somebody. They're not going to tell them their backstory because they don't want them to know, basically.
Right, right. No, but I thought it was really well handled. And then so what would you say, like, so what is the one thing that you were able to sort of keep, and also the one thing that you really wanted to keep, but you sort of had to give away as you were seeking publication?
Well, I don't feel bad about what I gave away. I think there were all kinds of things, and I think as novelists, well, I'm not a novelist who outlines. I do a lot of trial and error and sort of iterative writing. So there were lots of things that didn't get in. There was a time when for a long time, I thought that John should be a father when he meets Katya, and he had 2 children who started to take over the novel. So I literally had to kill my darlings. They didn't make it in. And I think that, the through line is trauma. And I think, Devi, clearly you're very interested in trauma as well. And I don't write fiction to put in messages, but I think one theme in my book is that if it's trauma is of a sufficient nature, you will not get over it. You will not get closure. It will be with you always. And I think we don't recognize that necessarily very well in America. But I thought it was really important to communicate that the scale of what John went through there is no closure for something like that. But we can learn how to manage it, and we can learn how to, as he does, really give back. He becomes a healer himself. And that's his way of doing his own healing and giving back some of what he's learned.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting because, I am often fond of saying that, I don't really believe in catharsis, right? Like nothing I write's going to make me feel better about what happened in 2010 when I lost all my stuff, right? And so, but I thought that in your novel, that was like so well communicated that you can move on, but you're still carrying the baggage, right? It has a different place, but you're still carrying it, right? Yeah, and I thought you did that so well. And so then I want to talk to you a little bit about like your process. Like it took you about 10 years, right, to finish the book. And so what would you say, how did you hone on, oh, this is a path that's working? And because I'm just curious because I have theories too about.
I want to ask you the same thing.
Okay.
I'm not always so articulate about this because it's so trial and error. But a huge problem for me was the order in which to tell the story. And as a writer, the way that I handle potential writer's block is just start in the manuscript where I can, because I'm very, very talented at saying, what I can't do. So, um,
Right.
so anything that feels like I could just write a sentence there, that's where I start. So I write totally out of order. And
Mhm.
then I received advice to tell the story chronologically, which I, in the end, thought it was not a good idea to do that. So then I had to undo everything and move everything around. And I did that a lot. I could not figure out the order for the longest time. Break up sections. That was the structure is really, really important to me as a writer. And it took me
Mhm.
a long time to get to a structure that I could live with and I thought was going to be okay. And, the book is so much about memory, and memory is also not orderly. Our memories come in at random times, and I
Right.
wanted the reader to have some of that experience.
Right.
So that was a big part. And then there were one of the biggest things that I had to do was the original effort. I centered the book around Swan Lake, which is a very, very famous ballet, and tried to learn as much as I could. And then I thought, somebody's going to know this ballet a lot better than I do, and I'm going to be making mistakes, and it's distracting. Plus, the story of Swan Lake has nothing to do with my story.
Right.
So I had to get rid of all of that, and I created all the ballets in the book from
Oh,
scratch. So
wow. That's amazing.
So I chose
Wow.
the music, I chose the titles, and I was able to then use the titles of the ballet as uh, in service of the plot. I mean, everything should be in service of the story, I think, and also to describe them in a way that would mesh with the action.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if you hadn't told me that, I was gonna be going down that rabbit hole, like, where is this ballet? And how come only
Um,
Martha knows about it?
for listeners on the call on my website, I do have a Spotify playlist. So if you want to hear the music,
Oh, I would
music
love
is real.
that.
If you want to hear the music, you can hear it.
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
definitely gonna go check that out. Oh, that's
But
great.
can you say a word about your process? I think that I always think this is an interesting question, but I also think we all have very, very individual approaches to
Oh,
that.
absolutely. And I think here's the secret, right? Like, yeah, now I know how to write Atlas, and
Yeah.
now I know how to write Circa, but that doesn't mean I know how to write another book. It's absolutely divorced from anything else that you're gonna do that's new,
Right.
right? People are like, well, what do you do? I'm like, yeah, well, I did two different things. I don't think either one of them are right for the one I'm about to tackle right now. So for Atlas, it was really interesting. I realized because I didn't have very much of what I had before, but what little I had, I couldn't use most of it because I had changed as a person and a writer, so my interest was different. But one thing was, I used to be a reporter, and so for example, if my daughter had said something at Wednesday at 2:00 in a pink dress, then you better believe in the original draft that there was a pink dress. It was 2:00 and it was Wednesday. And then when I came back to it in 2014, I'm like, oh, well, none of that's important, right? I'm more important about what she's what the thing that she said and the truth of that than what she's wearing or what time of day it is, unless it's central to the story. And so what I realized really quickly on with when I started writing was that I was actually writing a pantoum, which is like my favorite form in the world.
Can
And
you explain what that is? I don't know what
it's
that
a pantoum. So
is.
it's a braided form. So it's originally from Malaysia, but the French co-opted it a couple of hundred years ago. And so it's pantoum, and it's a braided form. So every stanza has 4 lines. So you take the first and the third line from the previous stanza, and you make that you take the second and the fourth line from the previous stanza and make that the first and the third line of the next stanza, and you braid yourself all the way down till the end. And at the end, you take the third and the first line from the original and you wrap it up. And when I got to the end and I saw what was happening in Atlas, I was like, oh, I just wrote a pantoum. So then And then what happened was I'm in a longstanding writing group, and one of my cohorts is a screenwriter, and she introduced me to Aristotle's incline, which is the format that screenwriters used. And so it really served my mother character, because she, in the opening pages of the book, is shot and lying on her driveway, so she can't get up and go have coffee and have, so everything is, so I used the structure of Aristotle's incline to tell her story. And so that worked out for me. I'm really grateful to my screenwriter friend for introducing me to that frame. But I like, and with Circa as well, I had tried so many different things over the years, and none of them were quite right. So when I did get to the second person, I'm like, oh, there she is. Okay. And then I was relieved that I was like, okay, I can hear her now, and I can go ahead and finish this story.
That is so interesting. Also, just personally, in terms of my reading taste, I'm a total sucker for books in the second person. Like, there's no book that I've ever read in the second person that I didn't love. Someday I'm going to have to do that. I just love it. I can't. It's kind of irrational. I can't tell you why I love it so much, but it's really, really interesting to me. I did try. Um, I tried putting in present tense in this book. I feel that present tense is used a lot by novelists today. I think it's
Mhm.
really overused, actually.
Mhm.
And the limitations of the present tense is that you can only be in the present, so it's hard to get back to the past. But I didn't think it was working. But there were whole sections that I wrote both ways to see which I would like better. And you can't just change the verbs. That's not the way it works.
No, you
Change it
can't.
because it like doesn't sound right, and then you got to redo it all. So
Yeah, right. Yes. And one of my poetry teachers gave me such great advice, which I employed for both of the novels, which is like, you have to read your work out loud,
yeah,
right? And so, in both cases, I read the book out loud to myself twice, and a couple of things happened, right? So my poetry teacher was Lucille Clifton, and so she was a big believer in oral tradition, and so she would say, when your tongue trips or you stumble, all it is an indication of incorrect word choice, right? And
yeah.
it's your chance to fix it. But she goes, but also when you're like breathing really hard to get to the end of the sentence, it means you're running a bit too long, right? And so a couple of things happened, like as I was reading my books aloud to myself, there were parts where I fixed it, but also there were parts, especially in Atlas, that were not in the correct order, because I was like, oh, she can't think this yet because it's too soon. But I would have never thought to change it had I not been listening, And so I really credit Lucille for putting the book in the correct order, because that advice saved me. Right. And I give that advice to every person I come across. He's like, what do you do? And I'm like, read it to yourself out loud, And so
No, I also do that too, and I love that you study with Lucille Clifton. Wow, what a gift! It's
it
amazing.
was a gift. It was a real
Yeah.
gift. Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so let's see. I just want to know a couple more things. So what would you say is like the overarching like theme or message that you're trying to impart?
Well, so two things. I don't know. I mean, I had a long career in social justice, so I'm very clear about advocacy and um, staying on mission. I don't. I mean, mission creep and staying on message. I don't think that way when I'm writing fiction, but I also believe that my book, I hope, has a lot of relevance for today. I think we are living in a time of terrible, dangerous bigotry, and it's coming in many, many forms, not just the rise of anti-Semitism, which comes up periodically through history, but also the extreme racism in this country and anti-immigrant or refugee fervor. I was really had refugees in mind as I was writing this, because unlike popular culture's belief, nobody comes to this country by choice as a refugee. Nobody chooses to be a refugee. And I would be very comfortable saying that is, nobody wants to leave their home country as a refugee. And I think we as a society have very, very little understanding of that and the trauma that people have gone through, and we are definitely seeing our worst natures right now. And
Mhm.
I think it's indisputable that bigotry is extraordinarily dangerous, and we have seen throughout history the result of unchecked bigotry.
Yeah. Yeah, we have. And I think one of the things that people will take away when they read your book is that it gives us a chance to have a candid conversation. And that's all we can really hope for as writers, right? Is to spark a conversation, because there's no change without candid conversation, right? And I really appreciated, so much about your strong female characters, and then even the Catherine's Aunt Mary, she works, and she's, and I was like, hey, this is awesome, right? Because especially for books that are set in that time period, there was definitely an expectation of what a lady looks like, right? And so I really appreciated that. Thank you so much. And the last question I was going to ask you is, shout out to people who are over 50, because I was a debut novelist at 52, and I know that you are really proud of your age, and you should be. But I think we should shout out to the fact that you don't have to be 25, that you can be a debut novelist and still be really cool and be older.
No, I think so too. And I think I couldn't necessarily have done this in my 20s when I look back. Life experience helps.
Yeah.
So I think, Becky, can I ask? I think there's a question in the chat.
Yes, there is. There is a question. What authors inspire Martha? Excuse me. And then it goes to, what are you reading now?
So I always have different answers to that question, and I always pull up my Goodreads account. So I have a personal commitment that I made to myself many, many, many years ago, that for every book I would read by a white person, I would read a book by a person of color. So then after about 5 minutes, I didn't have to think about that anymore, because there were so many choices that I read. So I read very deeply in Black history and American, trying to understand our history of slavery and indigenous genocide. I'm inspired. The most inspiring books to me are well-crafted books, which is why I'm so gaga over Devi's work. I mean, the Atlas of Reds and Blues, I don't know, it changed my life. It's just so beautifully written.
Oh, thank you.
So, and there are two books, there's one book that I really wish I would have written. It's by Vikram Seth, and it's called An Equal Music, and it's about the music world, and it's just beautifully composed. And the second book that I feel that way about is The Great Fire by Shirley Hazzard, also
Oh,
a
yes.
very poetic writer. In terms of what's out right now, I'm really excited about Imani Perry's book. See if I get you a title. She just won, what did I say? Did you say the National Book Award for it? It's called
Yes.
South
Yes, I think so.
America.
Yes.
She's a professor at Harvard, I think. And she went and she takes a look at each southern state and looks at individual Black history there. I thought it was really, really fantastic. And I am doing a deep dive into a lot of ballet books, because while I was writing this book, I didn't want to be reading ballet books because I didn't want to be influenced. So there's a new biography out that is a doorstopper. It's almost 700 pages about George Balanchine, called Mr. B, but it is a spectacular book, because it's written by the dance critic for the New Yorker, Jennifer Homans, who was herself a dancer, and she basically leaves no stone unturned. So I learned about Imperial Russia and parts of the Russian Revolution that I hadn't.
Wow.
This whole theory about Russian iconography and how it influenced Balanchine. I mean, I'm just crazy about it. It just came out, so I can. So I don't think it's on people's radars yet. So that's just a few. And now I would love to ask Debbie that question. What
Oh,
kind of
okay.
inspired you?
So I just finished reading Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. It's about the family of John Wilkes Booth, but it does not give John Wilkes Booth oxygen, right? But it answers this really interesting question that the author posed in the afterword when she wrote the book, which was, what happens to the family and the siblings of someone who's a monster, right? And so she really painted this very vivid picture of, because it turns out that a couple of his siblings were very famous actors, and one was an author and a poet, and so they had their own lives, and everything was quite destroyed, right? And so I was just really fascinated by that, and I finally read that. And then I was just saying earlier before we got on that I was in a conversation with a South Asian author recently, and she is a novelist, Soraya Khan, who has written a beautiful memoir, and it's called "The Cities We Take With Us," and it is beautiful. She is Pakistani and Dutch. And her mother had recently passed away when she started writing the memoir. And she was actually just going to write about the two cities that she was very familiar with growing up. But it turns out that all of the cities that her mother had inhabited ended up being a big central part to her book. And so she ended up writing about all these different places and what they all meant. And it's just a gorgeous family story that I think everyone should read.
Interesting. I mean, one other way that I might answer that question is I love it when poets become novelists because, I wish I could write poetry. I can't, but I always think poet novelists have a very special ear. And one book that came out last year is by Elizabeth Alexander, who was Obama's inaugural poet, called The Trayvon Generation, which is just
Ooh,
beautiful. Illustrated with photographs. I mean, and it's written post Trayvon Martin.
mm-hmm.
Partly as a message, she has two grown sons or young adult sons, and it's just a beautiful tribute to them, but also to the risks of being a mother, two black sons, and it's also a very short book, like the one you just mentioned, beautifully written.
Oh, that sounds so
Yeah,
great. Last year I read Memorial Drive, which
I
is
love
written by the memoir written by Natasha Trethewey. And that's not very long either. And it's gorgeous, right? And her mother was murdered, right? And so it's it might as well have been written, about something that happened a few years ago. And that's why I think I was so drawn to Booth, because although it was from a time, 150 years ago, it might as well have been, change a couple of things and it could be, it could just be a 5-year-old story
yeah.
that we are all
I
acquainted with.
Yes,
Right.
I absolutely loved the Memorial Drive as well. I mean, I think, I do think about it partly from a writer's point of view to be able to write about your mother's own murder. I can't even get my head around how difficult that must be. And it's just,
Yeah.
she's, it's just a beautiful book. And she handles it really well.
Yeah.
We have a couple more minutes for questions if anybody else has questions, but maybe I could ask Debbie I don't know if you're talking about what you're working on now.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so right now I am working on my third book. It's called Midnight at the War, and it is a novel. I am I used to be a reporter for newspapers, and I feel like I've been shouting at the TV for the last 22 years. But mostly I've been shouting because I feel like after 9/11, things really changed. I think that I think the who gets to tell the truth, and then if you're a person of color, if you're a female, like that shifts things around. And also I feel like the news has become more opinion based and less fact seeking. I think that people are more interested in being first rather than being right. And so, back in the day, before the rise of cable news, when I put something in the newspaper that had my byline on it, I had to be as sure as I could be that it was going to be right for 23 hours and 45 minutes until I could get the next story in there, right? And now I see people on TV and they're apologizing before the break, the commercial break, right? It creates this sort of problem, because let's suppose you and I are waiting at the, airport terminal to board an airplane, and we're both watching something, and then your plane is called, and so you go, and then the announcer apologizes for misspeaking. Now we're both right, because we've both heard him say something, but only I heard the apology, right? And so that has caused a huge problem, because people are so interested in breaking news and being first that they're not interested in being right and getting it right before they print it or publish it in some way. And I'm just so fascinated by that, especially I feel like that has caused so many problems. And just now we're all hooked on our personal computers that we put in our purses or our pockets, right? And and it's just never ending. We don't get a break. We don't have time to process what we've heard. We're, I think, becoming increasingly numb as a society because there's too much coming at us all the time, right? And
I think that's really true. Last night I was in New York and I spoke at a conference of historical novelists, and the question came up, why do we write fiction? And also in my book, as I said, it's considered historical fiction, but I ended up having to jettison things like real ballets, so those aren't historical. And I guess one thought I have about novels that the news can't do is, for years and years, I heard this expression that, fiction is about truth, and I could never really understand it. But I think the answer is it's about fiction can convey emotional truths that the news can't always convey. And I thought about this a lot writing about the Holocaust, because we are numbed by the numbers are so enormous of people murdered that you can't really think about it. But sometimes if you are able to tell one story about one person in one situation,
right,
even if it's fictional, it can be more truthful or more communicative than all the
right,
in the world.
right. And I'm a big believer in that. I just feel like, even the coverage that we see now, right? Like, I'm grateful that the Ukrainian conflict has been getting the attention it deserves, but there are so many other conflicts that are glossed over, like, 64 people died today. Well, that's not going to help. I want to know, right? I want that individual story, because that is actually that's going to make us care, and that's going to make us speak out so that it stops, right? And so what are you working on now?
So I have a book that I wrote a long time ago, which is about it's not autobiographical in the sense that neither character is really based on me, but I trained as a viola player, and it's very much about my early music training, and it's set in Philadelphia, which is my hometown. So I'm cleaning that up and saying a prayer that somebody will possibly be interested in publishing it. I don't know if they will be. And then I have a very giant project that's surreal that I'm not talking about too much, but it's about a girl who gets stuck in a painting. So,
That's wonderful.
Invisibility. It's a lot about
invisibility. Wonderful. That sounds great. I look forward to that. Oh, that's great.
That's great. So I don't know, Becky, what do you think? I think we're at time.
I think we're at our time. What a lovely discussion this has been. It's just been a joy to hear y'all. You'd think that y'all have known each other for years. It's amazing how well you're able to talk. It's like you just seem to have like this ability to communicate with each other and share information. It just seems so, I'm amazed that y'all just met. This is incredible. but both beautiful works. I loved hearing from both books, all three books, and I am just, I'm thrilled to have those available for people and to be able to, I'm looking forward to reading them myself. So I am really excited. Thank y'all so much for letting us host you. This has been a real pleasure and a real honor. Just a word about Malvern Books. Sadly, Malvern Books will be closing. We'll be ending our 9-year run on December 31st of this year. So we're sad to announce that, but the owner of the store passed away in July, and we just can't do it without him. He was the visionary behind the store. It was his dream, it was his goal, and we've been doing our best to keep it for him as best we can, but we realize it's time to close it up. So we hope that those of you who are in the Austin area will be able to come by the store before then. We'd love to see you. Check out our website for info about the store, promotions going on, things like that. And thank you again for this beautiful virtual event. And thank you all for joining us here tonight. The video of this will be posted on the Malvern Books YouTube website. Thank you all so much. Have a
Thank
wonderful